Montana Territory, 1878. The wind cut sharp through the Bitterroot Valley the day Eleanor Lark was cast out. Snow laced the edges of the sky as she stood at the edge of the settlement, her satchel slung over one shoulder, her fingers chapped and raw. Behind her, the wooden church bell tolled once and then fell silent. No one came to say goodbye, not even her own sister. "You bring no life into your husband's house," the elder had told her, voice low and cold in front of the gathered families. "God has closed your womb. We can no longer carry your burden." Eleanor had not wept. She stood straight, jaw set, even as the world she'd built in the last 5 years cracked at her feet. Her husband had died of fever 2 winters ago, and still they blamed her for the empty cradle, as if she had chosen this. She walked for 2 days, following the river south, boots soaked through, hunger a dull roar in her belly. She didn't pray. She had nothing left to ask for. On the 3rd morning, light broke over the hills like a promise. And from the east, a wagon approached. The man driving it wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long brown coat. Dust clung to his shoulders and a Bible rested on the bench beside him. He slowed when he saw her, pulling the reins gently. "You injured?" he asked. His voice was warm, gentle in a way that didn't pity her. "No," Eleanor said. "Just walking." "Where to?" She looked past him to the horizon. "Away," he nodded once. "I'm heading to Willow Creek, preaching Sundays, helping build a new chapel. You're welcome to ride along." She hesitated. Then she climbed into the wagon without a word. The man offered his hand. "Preston Pike, Eleanor Lark." They rode in silence for a time. The horses clopped steady along the frozen trail. After an hour he asked, "You got family waiting somewhere?" "No," she said. "They're done with me." He glanced at her but did not press. Just nodded, like he understood more than he said. Willow Creek was a small town nestled at the base of the hills. No more than 30 people, a few cabins, and one half-built church. Preston helped her down from the wagon and offered her his spare room above the general store. "Only place with heat," he said. "Stay as long as you need." Eleanor slept for 12 hours straight. The townsfolk were wary at first, but Preston spoke for her, introduced her as Miss Lark, a woman of quiet strength, and no one questioned him. Not when he said it like that. His voice carried weight. She helped where she could, sewing, milking, patching roofs. She didn't talk much, but her hands were steady, and people came to respect that. Around Preston, though, she softened. He had a way of looking at her like she wasn't broken, like he saw something worth keeping. One afternoon, while sanding the pews in the church, Eleanor asked him, "Why did you help me that day?" Preston set his tools down. "Because I saw someone walking through the cold with no one beside her, and I've known how that feels." She looked at him. "You been alone?" He nodded. "Lost my wife 6 years ago. Fever too, left me with a boy, Peter. He's 10 now, lives with my sister in Helena till I get settled here." Eleanor blinked. "You're a father?" His eyes softened. "Yes, ma'am, and I'll be bringing him here come spring." They did not speak again of the past. But something shifted between them after that. He started bringing her tea in the evenings. She mended his shirts without asking. He built her a table for her sewing, sanded smooth with rounded edges. One night, snow thick on the windows, he stood beside her by the fire. "You know," he said slowly, "there's more to a woman than the children she bears." Eleanor's breath caught. "I don't care what they said to you," he went on. "You have worth, Eleanor. You are worthy. You always were." She turned toward him, heart pounding. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Preston took her hand, just held it. Nothing more, but her fingers curled into his and neither of them let go. The roof beams groaned softly as the wind pressed against the chapel walls, but inside the fire held steady. Eleanor moved through the half-finished nave with a basket of hymnals tucked close to her side, the hem of her skirt brushing wood shavings on the floor. Preston was at the far end, kneeling beneath a stained glass panel still wrapped in burlap, measuring the frame with quiet care. "I've never seen glass like that," she said, her voice carrying gently across the pews. "Where's it from?" He looked up, pencil tucked behind his ear. "Came west with a German family. They couldn't stay through the first winter. Left it behind in trade for oats and salt pork. She stepped closer, setting the basket down. "What'll it show?" He stood, brushing sawdust from his knees. "A lamb cradled in a shepherd's arms. I thought it might bring comfort." Eleanor traced the edge of the cloth where it wrapped the glass. "You believe people can be held like that, after everything?" "I believe some things are stronger than pain," he said. "Faith, grace, love when it's true." She looked at him, steady. "And if someone stops believing, then someone else believes for them a while," he said. "Until they can again." Neither spoke after that for some time. He returned to measuring. She began dusting the windowsills with a cloth dipped in vinegar water. Later, at the cookhouse behind the mercantile, Eleanor ladled beans into bowls for the evening meal. Mrs. Sutter, who ran the store and housed the dry goods upstairs, handed her a folded paper wrapped in twine. "Letter came for the preacher." Eleanor nodded. "I'll bring it." When she climbed the narrow stairs to his quarters, the door was open. Preston was seated at his writing desk, oil lamp glowing warm beside him. He turned as she entered. "Letter for you," she said, offering it. He took it, eyes flicking over the handwriting. "From my sister. She says Peter's boots are too small again." Eleanor gave a soft breath of laughter. "He's growing fast then." "He's tall like his mother was," Preston said, peeling back the twine. His smile faded slowly as he read. "She says he's had nightmares, wakes up crying." Eleanor's fingers curled around the edge of her apron. "Does he know you're coming for him?" "I write every week." "Still, it's hard for a child to wait." She stepped forward. "Maybe we could build something for him, a toy or a small chair, so he knows there's a place for him here." Preston's expression shifted, something grateful blooming behind his eyes. "Would you help me with that?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'd like to." The following days they worked side by side in the workshop behind the chapel. She stitched a cushion cover from scraps of wool. He smoothed cedar slats for the frame. They spoke little, but the quiet between them was companionable. One afternoon, as she was fitting the cushion into place, Preston set down his hammer. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what it means to build a home. Not just walls and roofs, but the kind of steadiness someone can hold on to." Eleanor didn't lift her gaze. "Homes can be taken or leave you behind." "That's true," he said, "but some can be made again, not the same but new if both people want it." She looked at him then. His hands were calloused, his shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms. There was a gentleness in the way he stood, not reaching, not pushing, just waiting. "I've never been asked what I want," she said. "You're being asked now." She swallowed. "I want to stop feeling like I'm only what I've lost." He stepped closer, slow and sure. "You're not. You're what you've endured, what you've given, what you could still give if you chose." Eleanor searched his face. "And what would you give?" "Steadiness," he said. "Respect. A place beside me, not behind." The cushion fell from her lap as she stood. Her hands found his and he held them gently. "I don't need a vow tonight," he said. "But I needed you to know I see you, and I'd wait if waiting is what it takes." Her throat tightened. She nodded once, then pressed her forehead to his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, slow and careful, like holding something that had been dropped too many times. And that night, when the wind howled again, the chapel stood firm. And so did they. By the time winter began to slip its hold on the valley, the earth softened beneath the hooves of the horses, and the creek ran louder with meltwater. The last frost clung to the shaded corners of the chapel grounds, but by midday, the air carried warmth again. Eleanor worked in the garden plot behind the store, kneeling in the damp soil with her sleeves rolled past her elbows. She had coaxed potatoes out of worse ground before. Her hands moved with quiet purpose, tucking the seed eyes into the earth, smoothing the dirt over them like promises. Preston stepped around the corner with a bedroll under one arm and a small wooden crate under the other. He paused when he saw her. "I've got to ride north tomorrow," he said. "Peter's ready." Eleanor brushed dirt from her palms. "How long will you be gone?" 4 days, maybe 5. "Roads are still soft." He set the crate down near her. "I built it for his books. He's stubborn about reading, but I think he misses his mother's voice more than he lets on." She studied the crate, the dovetail joints neat and sturdy. Then she looked up at him. Will he like it here? He'll take his time, he always does. Preston crouched beside her, his knee brushing hers in the soil. But he's kind, pays attention, you'll get along. She nodded once, then resumed her planting. When he didn't rise, she spoke again. Do you want me to prepare his bedding while you're gone? No rush, he said. He'll be sleeping close to me for a while, but I'd be glad for your hand in it when the time's right. That evening, Eleanor stayed long past dusk in the chapel, oil lamp glowing low on the pulpit. She stitched a simple cloth to hang over the front of the altar, deep blue with a pale border. She didn't know what moved her to do it, only that the space would soon carry more voices, and she wanted it to feel tended. Preston left at dawn the next morning. He didn't ask for anything before he went, only touched her hand as she handed him a wrapped loaf of bread. I'll see you soon, he said, and she nodded. The town moved slower in his absence. Eleanor kept to her routines, checking the hens behind the general store, repairing the tear in young Miss Sutter's shawl, sweeping out the chapel before sunrise. Still, in the quiet stretches, her thoughts drifted north, tracing the trail Preston rode. When he returned on the 5th day, his boy rode in front of him on the saddle, arms wrapped around the saddle horn, boots muddy from the road. Preston lifted him down gently, and Peter looked around with eyes wide and wary. Eleanor stepped forward slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Welcome, Peter. He didn't answer, only nodded once and held tighter to his father's coat. Preston glanced down. He's not much for strangers, but he's not unkind. Eleanor crouched, keeping her voice even. I was new here once too. It takes time. Peter blinked at her, then looked away. Preston tousled the boy's hair gently. Let's get him fed. That night, Eleanor brought stew to the back room where Preston and Peter had settled in. The boy sat cross-legged on a cot, turning a small carved horse between his fingers. I gave him that when he turned 6, Preston said, setting his bowl down. He keeps it in his pocket like it's a secret. Eleanor sat on the stool by the wall. Does he miss Helena? He misses what he knew, but he's watching everything here. He'll open up. Peter didn't speak during supper, but he listened, his eyes flitting between them. When Preston stepped out to refill the lantern, Eleanor rose and crossed to the cot. I made something for you, she said softly, reaching into her apron. She pulled out a small cloth pouch stitched with red thread. It's got a coin and a sprig of yarrow, for safekeeping. Peter stared at it, then took it wordlessly and tucked it under his pillow. Preston returned and paused in the doorway, something quiet settling in his expression. Later that night, as the wind rustled the bare branches outside, Preston stood beside Eleanor on the chapel steps, both of them watching the stars blink into view. He didn't speak much, she said. He doesn't have to, Preston replied. He took the gift. That's the first step, she turned to him. I'd like to help him find his place here, if that's all right. He looked at her, the lantern light catching the edge of his jaw. You already are. Their hands brushed, and this time she didn't pull away. He laced his fingers with hers, slow and sure. She leaned into him, and they stayed like that, shoulders touching as the sky softened from black to indigo. A new season was coming, not only in the land but in them too, and neither would face it alone. Mid-April brought the first green along the creeks, willow branches budding, and the scent of thawed earth rich in the air. Eleanor stood outside the chapel with a pail of water, scrubbing the last of the winter soot from the windows. She heard Peter before she saw him, the uneven rhythm of his boots against the packed dirt, the wooden horse clutched in one hand, the other curled in his coat pocket. He stopped a few steps away, watching her work. Would you like to try? She asked, dipping the cloth into the pail and wringing it once. He gave a slow shrug, then stepped forward. She passed him the cloth, letting him stand on the low crate she used to reach the upper panes. You don't have to press hard, she said. Just steady circles. Peter's brow furrowed in concentration as he began to wipe. His hands were small but careful. She stood beside him, not correcting, only watching. After a long minute, he glanced sideways. My ma used to braid her hair like yours. Eleanor didn't smile. Did she hum when she did it? He nodded. Always. She said it kept her hands from forgetting the pattern. They worked in silence after that, and when the window was clean, Peter stepped down and handed her the cloth without a word. Then he walked off toward the stable, the wooden horse swinging from his fingers. That evening, Preston found Eleanor behind the chapel, trimming dead branches from the lilac bush near the southern wall. "He followed you this afternoon," he said, folding his arms loosely. "Didn't say a word about it, but I saw him watching through the fence. He helped with the windows," she said, "and mentioned his mother." Preston's gaze softened, but his voice stayed level. "He never speaks of her." "I didn't ask," Eleanor said. "He offered it." Preston nodded once. "He's building something, quietly." She set down the shears. "He's welcome here, Preston, however long it takes." They stood together as a pair of geese passed overhead, their calls echoing down the valley. "Have you thought more about what comes next?" he asked. Eleanor tilted her head, meeting his eyes. "For you and Peter, for all of us." She brushed soil from her hands. "I've thought about where I belong, what it would mean to say yes to something I didn't believe I deserved before." Preston stepped closer but didn't reach for her. "And now, I believe it's possible," she said. "But not just because you offered, because I want to." He searched her face. "Then I'd ask again, stand beside me, Eleanor, not just for Peter's sake, for mine." She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded scrap of muslin. Inside was a hand-stitched sachet filled with dried lavender and wool, a child's pillow charm. "I made this," she said, "for his bed." Preston took it, fingers closing carefully around the cloth. "He'll sleep easier with it, and so will I." She looked up at him then, fully. "I will." He stepped forward, and this time, when his hands touched her shoulders, she leaned into him. Behind them, the chapel windows gleamed in the falling light, the glass catching the last gold of the day. Inside, the pews sat waiting, the altar cloth smoothed and steady, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and warmth. They stood together until the sun dropped below the ridge. No words left between them, only the hush of something long hoped finding shape at last. The wedding was held on the first day the cottonwoods leafed out, pale green against the sky like new breath. The ground behind the chapel had softened enough for wild violets to push up, and the river ran full but gentle, its banks no longer threatening with melt. They stood before the altar Preston had built with his own hands, the lamb glass window behind them glowing soft with morning light. Eleanor wore a dress she'd sewn from calico traded months ago, the only fine touch a row of tiny shell buttons down the back. Peter stood beside Preston, hair combed flat and his small boots polished as best as could be managed. Reverend Whitlow from Three Forks made the ride down to speak the vows. "The strength of a union," he said, "is not in ease, but in the quiet choosing of each other day after day through all that may come." Eleanor's hands didn't tremble when she took Preston's. She had steadied too many things to shake now. Afterward, the townsfolk gathered by the creek bank with bread, preserves, and a pot of venison stew that simmered over an open flame. No one gave speeches. There was no music. But the air held that hush of deep contentment, like the land itself had settled into the moment. As the sky turned amber, Preston found her standing by the bluff edge, looking out past the brush line to where the hills broke into open prairie. He came up behind her, his coat brushing her back. "You ever think about what's out there?" she asked, chin lifted toward the horizon. "I used to," he said. "Used to think I needed to keep moving to find peace, but peace doesn't come from running." She turned. "No, it comes when you stop long enough to let something grow." He reached for her hand. "We've got ground now. We just need to tend it." She leaned into him, cheek resting below his collarbone. "Do you think I'll be a good mother to him?" "You already are," he said. "He sleeps through the night now, carries your charm in his coat pocket. Told me this morning your cornbread's better than mine." She laughed then, warm and full. "That boy knows how to keep a household." They returned home as twilight deepened, Peter asleep across Preston's shoulders. The house behind the chapel had been raised by neighbors in the weeks before the wedding, one room wide with a wood stove in the corner and a loft above. The three of them fit into it like they'd always been meant to. That first night, Eleanor stood by the window while Preston banked the fire. The wind outside had settled and the scent of lilac drifted through the cracks in the sill. He crossed to her, arms looping around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That I never imagined a life like this. Not after everything." He pressed his forehead gently to hers. "Neither did I. But some lives are built, not found." She tilted her face, and when their lips met, it was not with urgency but with quiet certainty. Something long earned and deeply kept. That spring, the garden behind the chapel took root. Eleanor taught Peter how to thin the seedlings and when to turn the soil. Preston built a bench beneath the cottonwood, and on Sundays after service, they sat there together, his arm around her, Peter leaning against her knee with a book in his lap. By high summer, the chapel was complete, every pew filled most weeks, and the lamb glass window shone like a promise in the late light. Eleanor led the hymn once a month now, voice low but clear, and no one ever questioned her place. There were hard days, still the land did not soften for anyone's comfort too long, and grief did not vanish just because joy had come. But they bore it together. Preston never forgot to listen. Eleanor never stopped choosing steadiness over silence, and Peter laughed more now than he ever had before. Years passed. The town grew by a few cabins, the chapel's bell rang louder when the wind was right. The bench under the cottonwood grayed with weather, but it never broke. Eleanor's hair silvered at the temples. Preston's hands grew rougher with time. And still, every evening, they returned to each other, he with his sleeves rolled, she with the scent of flower on her apron, Peter taller now, his voice deeper but his eyes still full of quiet. One morning, as the first frost dusted the porch rail, Eleanor came down the stairs with a shawl around her shoulders. Preston was already at the stove, ladling coffee into 2 tin mugs. He turned with a smile. "You sleep?" "Well enough," she said, taking the warm cup from his hand. "Dreamt of violets." He touched her chin just once. "Spring's not so far off." She looked around the room they'd built, the boy they'd raised now grown and strong, the chapel just visible through the window. "No," she said. "It's not far at all." And in that quiet, with the fire crackling and the morning light rising soft through the trees, Eleanor Lark Pike leaned into her husband's arms and knew she had found her home. Through hardship, through grace, through the slow choosing of love she had come through and been met. Fully. And at last she was held.